What is going on, everybody? Welcome into our next top 10 positional breakdown video for the 2023 NFL Draft. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a linebacker class that is certainly not as strong as some linebackers classes of recent years, but still some very interesting players to take a look at here. Really looking forward to it. I do want to remind you to set a reminder to come back here in about a week for draft weekend. I will be live here on YouTube for every single pick of the draft, giving my reactions, live grades to the picks. It's going to be a blast. Can't wait to see you guys there. We're getting there, man. And before we get started, if you could do me a huge favor, please take just a second, hit that like button down below. It's a free and easy way to support my channel in a meaningful way. I really appreciate it. And let's get into it with my number 10 linebacker, and it's going to be TCU Dee Winters. And, you know, he's your classic missile without a targeting system at the linebacker position. Really athletic guy, ran a 4.49, certainly undersized. But, you know, the Dee Winters evaluation is almost more about the state of linebacker play and what you kind of want to do with these late round linebackers in the modern NFL. And I've talked about this a lot on my podcast, The Fully Inflated Football Show, in other videos. But the linebacker position truly has become arguably the hardest position to grow into a good player at the NFL level, even more than like quarterback. And I am not kidding. Hear me out on this. With the way the game has changed, you've got such an uptick in play action to begin with. So these guys have to, you know, read and react to play fakes and not bite the cheese. You have to still be able to get depth in your drops while also defending the run, or quarterbacks are just going to pick you apart over the intermediate part of the field, where modern offenses are deliberately targeting for a reason. It's the number one reason play action is so effective, because these linebackers get sucked in. You now have the implementation of RPOs. That is a scheme systematically designed to read the linebacker position and make that player wrong. It just is a very difficult thing to defend at that position. And then you have the increase in 11 personnel, which in turn is increasing nickel defenses, taking an extra defensive lineman off the field, making it not just harder for these linebackers to defend the run, because you don't have that extra guy occupying an offensive lineman up front, but you now have to cover oftentimes a slot wide receiver. You've got these offenses getting these really athletic move tight ends in play now. So the physical demands of the position against the run and the pass have just completely altered this position. And we are in a bit of a transition period, I think, between the old linebacker and then the modern linebacker, and the NFL is still trying to figure out what to do with that. And I'm going completely off the rails here, but I think it's an important place to start with this entire conversation about, you know, this is why drafting these super athletic first round linebackers has been a failed proposition for so many teams over the last 5 to 6 years. And this comes for full circle now with a guy like Dee Winters here, because Winters is that 4th or 5th round guy that you want to invest in. You want to let him come in, learn the position, have to work for that starting playing time, as opposed to a first round athlete that's going to be gifted that job. Really have to understand the nuances of the position and get to a point in 3 or 4 years where that athletic profile can be tapped into, and they could be a two-way player. So for Dee Winters, you know, I think of all of these basically linebacker prospects outside of the top 100 picks or so, even into like the 5th, 6th round, you know, this is not a very deep linebacker class. We're talking about a 4th or 5th round prospect here, already in the top 10 at the position. But of all of these sort of dart throw linebackers that you're just going to kind of stash on special teams, let them use their speed, their tackling ability while they hopefully develop, Dee Winters is that guy. Now, before we go to my number 9 guy, like, I will say, I first discovered him watching him live against Michigan, and my God, that might be the most impressive linebacker performance anybody on this entire list had. His second to last game of his career was really not even on a whole lot of scouts. I mean, he was a relevant prospect, but I think that game alone pushed him up into the top 10 of this list here, and showed kind of what a best case scenario might look like for a guy like Dee Winters, who was flying all over the field in that college semifinal game against Michigan. Now, before we get to my number 9 guy here, I do want to tell you guys about my friends at Underdog Fantasy. I have told you about their daily pick'em contests in the past. I love pick'em. Right now, even with NFL out of action, you can play pick'em on NBA, USFL, XFL, MLB, where you're setting your lineups, picking your over-unders, and you can win up to 20-1 odds there. I think you guys are really going to enjoy pick'em, but also, they are full force now with best ball fantasy. If you're like me and you're in 5-6 leagues and you don't really have the time to manage the day-to-day of a league, but you can't get enough fantasy football and you enjoy putting your football knowledge to the test to win some money, best ball is where you want to go, and Underdog Fantasy is the king of best ball. Drafts are going right now, so if you want to get in early on these rookies before a lot more of the casual fans, come in and learn about these rookies a little bit later, now is a great time to sign up at Underdog Fantasy. You can begin your best ball contest now, draft the rookies that are in this draft, and go win some money, man. So that is at Underdog Fantasy. Right now, if you sign up using promo code TFG, you will save or they will match, rather, up to $100 on your first deposit, and you'll support my channel in the process. So my number 9 linebacker is going to be a really fascinating player, Ivan Pace out of Cincinnati. One of the more fun watches in this entire class, a really unique player and a really unique play style. And that uniqueness shows up in both phases of the game. Let's start with where he's at as a run defender. He's 5'10" and a half, 230 pounds. He is undersized for the position, there's no doubt, and he's probably never going to be a great run defender. But what is commendable about him is he is ultra instinctive, using what leverage he does have as an advantage to sort of slip blocks, to navigate through the mud and find the ball carrier. He has really good instincts and diagnostics at the position to find the ball against the run. Now, he will get drowned out if a lineman gets his hands on Ivan Pace. He's going backwards, and he's not going through that offensive lineman. He also, because he has he's really aggressive against the run, and he loses gap discipline quite a lot. So he's a very boom or bust run defender. But where there's hope is what he could be in coverage, where it was actually pretty good. Like, I think he understands the coverage aspect of the position. He's instinctive to kind of come downfield and make plays underneath. Man-to-man, though, he's not the fastest guy. He ran a 4.62 40. He doesn't have the length and size to kind of disrupt tight ends down the field. So, he's going to be a limited coverage player as well, but I think he's okay back there. And where he really shines is as a blitzer. He is one of the best blitzing linebackers I've ever seen. And if nothing else, if his size does become a non-starter for him, pun intended, like if he can't start because he's just not consistent enough at his size, he can at least be a great special teamer, but a guy that you can also bring in dime packages to get after the quarterback, because he has this rare combination of an incredible first step. He's got rare quickness, and he has all of these different pass rush moves that he uses to obliterate running backs. I mean, he can run through them, but he'll slip around them, he'll spin around them, he'll swim around them. Just really crazy ability at getting after the quarterback that was really highlighted by his appearance in the Senior Bowl. But he's a very fascinating player, a unique skill set, and I've kind of come around on the thought of him maybe becoming a starter someday. At first, I really dismissed him, but I can see him being just kind of a boomer bust run defender, a decent coverage linebacker, and an elite blitzer, and that could be enough to make him a solid number 2 linebacker in the NFL. And in fact, I found a pretty good pro comp for him. Linebacker Daiyan Brown used to be with the Titans. He's bounced around a little bit now. Had a couple of really good years, but did kind of flame out. Not the biggest guy, not the fastest guy, but someone likewise was an okay run defender, pretty solid coverage player, and a really good blitzer for the Titans. So I think there is a prototype for him to come in like Daiyan Brown in the mid rounds. and potentially climb up a depth chart. But like I said, if nothing else, he's got a really nice floor as a special teamer and an awesome blitzer to bring in certain dime packages. My number 8 linebacker is going to be Henry To'oTo'o out of Alabama. And I'm going to be honest, man, I just can't get excited about To'oTo'o. And maybe I'm a little bit jaded because I watched so much Blake Martinez for the Green Bay Packers. I kind of led the charge, calling him overrated, even though every year he's like leading the league in tackles because he just kind of let the run flow to him. But he was never an impact linebacker. He never really made a difference on the field at all. Now, he went to New York, had one really good year there. Kind of started to play a little bit more aggressive, and good for him. He's ripping Pokemon packs. He's retired now. He had a really nice career for what he was. But I see so many similarities in Henry To'oTo'o's game. Now, not every pro comp is perfect, of course. There's some differences between these guys, but especially in terms of like their athletic profile, it's super similar, man. I mean, coverage is just not going to be an option for Henry To'oTo'o. He's extremely stiff. If he's trying to, cover a tight end or a running back top down, they're going to run routes and juke him out of his shoes. Seriously. He doesn't have the long speed to hang on deep overs or crossing routes. And even in zone, it's like he's a smart player, but he just can't get from point A to point B very quickly. He doesn't get enough depth in his drops. He's just going to be a liability on third down. And he's just like Blake Martinez. You can blitz him to try and compensate for his lack of coverage, but he's not arriving with a whole lot of force or athletic ability to make blocking, tight ends or running backs especially miss or run through them. So he just isn't a very practical 3-down linebacker. And at some point, even if he is starting on a weaker linebacker unit, at some point you're going to want to replace him. Now, in run defense, he does a lot of that solid stuff. Like, he reads out the run really well. He understands what schemes are coming his way, and he's going to kind of let traffic flow and navigate his way to the ball. But, that's where there's a little bit of difference with a guy like Blake Martinez. Number one, Martinez was a much more consistent tackler. I think he was a little bit more strong at the point of attack, and he was a little bit bigger than a guy like To'oTo'o. I just don't think To'oTo'o's arms are all that strong. You see backs run through arm tackles against him, and you don't see really good shed strength when he takes on blocks either. So those are limiting factors in run defense. Another difference is I think To'oTo'o plays a little bit more like Giants Blake Martinez in terms of run defense decision-making, if you will, where he's going to take a few more gambles, shoot himself into the backfield, and try to at least take some risks, which is a good balance to have for sure. But you see that C+ gap discipline rating. There's a lot of times where he's abandoning cutbacks or undershooting a gap on wide zone runs and leaving the outside open. So, he's a smart player. He's a leader of the defense type. Nick Saban talks this guy up. He's been a high-end tackling linebacker, really, from a volume perspective at Alabama for a couple years. So I think he can step in and compete for a starting job right away in like those teams that just don't value linebacker and are just kind of like, yeah, we'll put whoever out there. But I don't see him as a long-term starter. I think he's more of a, relief linebacker. If you got a guy that gets hurt, he can step in and run the show okay. But I can't get all that excited about Henry To'oTo'o. I'm sorry. But I do get a little bit more excited about my number 7 linebacker, and that's Ventrell Miller out of Florida. And, you're starting to get through all these, linebackers 10 through 20 and just looking for anybody that can play the position well, really. It's all these kind of Dee Winters types where it's like, yeah, I mean, if he gets coached up in 3 years, maybe he'll turn into something. Well, Ventrell Miller is kind of the opposite, where he's 24 years old. He's played 1 million snaps in the NFL. In the SEC. And the first thing that stands out about him is his leadership and mentality at the position. He's a team captain. He's the guy, giving, firing, inspirational pump-up talks on the sideline. He's communicating pre-snap. And he just flies around and makes plays, man. I really like his game, and I think if you look at that opening dialogue I had about the linebacker position at large, if you really need someone to step in and help you right away, I think he can do that. I think he understands the game. He, especially against the run, like he reads things out really well. He's aggressive. He has good strength to take on blocks, but a willingness to do it as well. And like I said, I think he's very well developed there. Now, likewise to a guy like Toa, he does miss tackles. He's not the most athletic guy in space. He will whiff. He can come in a little bit too hot and not really break down at the point of attack and get juked out of his shoes that way as well. So maybe that's room for improvement there. But overall, I think he's just a good high floor run defender. And I liked what he did in coverage a lot more than like Henry Toa, for example. I really felt like he was decent in zone at kind of navigating to the right space, would get his head around, find work as the play went on. He even had some good reps, as I'm showing you on this highlight reel, like covering backs out of the backfield man-to-man. Tight ends, though, it's not really going to be in his tool belt. He's not the biggest guy, 6 feet tall, not the longest guy, not the fastest guy. He's going to be outmatched if you try to put him man-to-man on tight ends. But a good blitzer, was decent against play action. Sometimes he took the cheese, sometimes he didn't fall for it. So I think he's functional on third down and can be a good run defending linebacker at the next level. Reminds me a lot of those two Miami linebackers staying in the state of Florida, but a different program. Two guys that came out with similar profiles. Shaquille Quarterman as a low-end comp. Quarterman hasn't really turned into anything yet in the NFL, was a mid-round pick for the Jags. And then Denzel Perriman, who's had a fantastic career, I think as a second-round pick out of Miami. I think he's going to fall somewhere in that spectrum. Just kind of a my guy in this class and someone that no one's really talking about. So I do like Ventrell Miller. And then really another kind of my guy that stood out to me in that deep range of linebackers here is my number 6 player, and that's SirVocea Dennis. And there's the potential here to call him Sir Dennis, which, I just think that's a great nickname for him. But anyway, really balanced player here. And a lot of similar things that I said about Ventrell Miller apply to Dennis when it comes to he just exudes energy, the leadership. He has this sort of confident aura around him that I think inspires confidence in his teammates. So as a run defender, he's a little bit smaller than a guy like Miller. He's 225 pounds. But I will say he's got great length. He's got 33.5-inch arms, and he uses that to, really compensate for a little bit of that size deficiency that he has. Now, of course, he's going to get kind of sucked into the black hole in the trenches sometimes. If he gets locked into a lineman, it's just not a whole lot he can do with that size. But he does use that length to kind of shuffle and distance himself from those engagements at times. He at times will do those sort of sidestepping dips to get around a lineman. But he also has decent strength in his arms to actually take on blocks and do your traditional stack and shed. He's definitely not the worst stack and shed linebacker in this class, not from a long shot. He's got good diagnostics, good discipline. I just think he's very sound in this department, but again, never going to be incredible as a run defender because he's not the biggest guy. Now, where that arm length really shows up is in his tackling, where he was phenomenal. Dennis only missed 4 tackles on the season because he just, he casts a web around his tackling target, and he arrives with force as well because he has outstanding first step acceleration. So I like him in that phase. And then he's very intriguing to me in coverage. I think that's where you could get some really nice upside here. And actually my high-end comp is Dre Greenlaw, who came in as a mid-round pick, an almost identical sort of athlete in terms of size and speed. And Greenlaw, likewise, took some time to really get up to speed. He's one of those premium examples of a mid-round linebacker ascending to being, at this point, one of the higher-paid linebackers in the game. And I think that is possible for a guy like Dennis. But he's just really underdeveloped in coverage because they blitzed him so much. They blitzed him. Let's just pull up the splits real quick. It's not that he never ran coverage or looked terrible when he did, but you're talking about a guy that had, he had 293 coverage snaps last year and 120 pass rush snaps. So on passing downs, one out of 3 times they're blitzing him, and for good reason. He's a crazy effective blitzer, instinctive, that first step. He's powerful when he meets backs. This guy had 18 sacks in his college career, so they blitzed him for good reason, but he was just very hit or miss in zone coverage. I liked the flashes. I think there were times where he was getting his head around, covering players, not grass, coming downhill and making plays, but he only has 1 pass deflection, 2 interceptions in his career. So it's just there's just not a whole lot of example of him being a great coverage linebacker. Man-to-man as well, he's doesn't have the best top speed. So if he's covering a deep cross or having to handle a slot wide receiver, he's going to be a little bit overwhelmed in that department. But you can shelter him depending on scheme in that regard. And then I do got to say, in the Duke game, there was just a couple plays I was like, okay, this guy really gets it. There's a play I'm showing you where he's just annihilating a crossing route, preventing the guy from getting into his route when it's legal contact, and then the game-winning stop. They're going for 2 at the end of the game to try and tie it. He recognizes Philly special, and he just triggers on it and completely blows it up, ends up winning the game for Pittsburgh. So I'm like, all right, this guy understands what he can and can't do, taking, maybe going outside of the liberties of his own assignment to do some of this stuff, and I think that's a necessary evil at times at this also difficult linebacker position. So this is definitely a player that stood out to me, a balanced player with starter upside. Bring him in the 4th round, let him cover kicks, play special teams as he kind of fights for that starting job. Then we got number 5, Dorian Williams out of Tulane. And the conversation with him is going to be fairly similar to Dee Winters, but Dorian Williams is a much elevated version there. You're talking about a guy that probably is a day 2 pick, in my opinion, because of the athletic upside and the fact that he really is a solid coverage linebacker out the gate. I think that's where you want to start with him, in that he 4.49 40 time. He's got almost 34-inch arms, which I'll talk, that helps him a little bit in run defense, but, arm length is really good in coverage too, because it helps you slow down tight ends by putting that hand in his hip pocket to kind of disturb his route running. It helps you have that length to get your hands in the way of passing lanes when you are getting targeted. Length just helps in so many different ways. And even if he's only, 6'1", 228 pounds, he's got some of the best arm length in this class, and it just really helps his range back there, on top of the fact that he's a really good athlete. It's not just the long speed. A lot of linebackers have good long speed, but can't really move laterally and change directions and accelerate the way that a guy like Dorian Williams does. Dorian Williams just kind of glides around back there. He shows a lot of promise as a coverage linebacker, as opposed to someone, say, like Owen Papa, who didn't even make this list. Owen Papa runs like a 4.39, but he can't move the way Dorian Williams does. So that's just got a lot of promise. He's a great blitzer as well. He clearly was trained not to take the cheese on play action. He's kind of grown up in this, all these guys have, but he's embraced this idea that, it's a spread game. I'm a pass defense linebacker first and then a run defender. Now, that mindset hurts him as a run defender. He's just does not have a quick trigger against the run, guesses lanes wrong, doesn't really have a fully established understanding of, how teams are trying to attack them in the run game. He has good gap discipline because, honestly, I would say it's probably because he's just not moving a whole lot against the run a lot of times. But I think he values the idea of, I don't want to blow this as a run defender, but I want to see a little bit more aggression from him. And then, of course, he is just not the biggest guy, and he's not the strongest guy. So when you want to talk about his take-on technique, ability to handle blocks, it's extremely underdeveloped. I think with the length, it's possible for that to come along a little bit, but you're probably never expecting him to be, Bobby Wagner back there defending the run, which is fine if he can be a great coverage linebacker. And my high-end comp for him is Deion Jones, who's been exactly that earlier in his career. Now, he kind of had a physical fall off later in his career, but Deion Jones, that's a pretty damn good comp. This is a guy that was at least a top 10 linebacker for a long time. I think at one point was the highest paid linebacker in the NFL, and just a really rangy, good cover linebacker. So it's no guarantee when it comes to coverage at this position, but if you're gambling on a guy outside of the top 3 in this class to be a good coverage linebacker, Dorian Williams is going to be that guy. He's an impressive athlete with a good feel at the position, and certainly worth a top 100 pick. Next up, we got Trenton Simpson out of Clemson, who I think for some people is still kind of in that top 50, a potential, number 1 linebacker in this class, and he is kind of the opposite for me. He's a complete not my guy. The gap between him and Dorian Williams is minuscule. I actually think Dorian Williams is a better player. I think Trenton Simpson is outside of Dee Winters, the worst linebacker right now on this list as far as can he play the position through and through. And the answer is just no. He just not to be too harsh, but he just doesn't look like he knows what he's looking at. He takes the cheese on play action. His run diagnostics are all over the place. Sometimes he triggers too early. Sometimes he triggers too late. He can completely blow his gap discipline, even when he's not making plays. He's just kind of hanging out, not pursuing the ball, losing his gap. He doesn't take on blocks well at all, even though he's got the size to do it. In coverage, he's just kind of hanging out there, moving where the quarterback's eyes go. He's not really looking at receivers and trying to understand how offenses are trying to attack him. I really worry about his sort of overall feel for the position. And that's going to have to come along at the next level. And the athletic tools are 100% worth the gamble. And the fact that I still rank him ahead of a guy like Dorian Williams says a lot about what his athletic tools are. You know, he's a bigger guy than a guy like Dorian Williams, 6'2", 235 pounds, a 4.43 40-yard dash. He's got insane speed. He's faster than like any safety in this class. He moves pretty well in space. I don't think he's quite as fluid as Dorian Williams, but still very fluid for the position. A little bit more raw strength as well, like we mentioned. I think the man coverage is going to be fine. If you say, hey, just stay on this tight end, don't worry about anything else, I think he can do that. If you blitz him, he's phenomenal. He's a unbelievable blitzer because not only is he fast and explosive, but he arrives with power. He's got some pass rush moves. He really does. They played him off the edge sometimes. That's where his best tape comes, is as a pass rusher moving around. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's kind of got a late career transition to edge type of thing, or even an early career transition. I wouldn't be stunned if a team looks at Trenton Simpson as kind of that Micah Parsons mold. He's not Micah Parsons, but as a guy, it's like, this guy's actually playing out of position. Let's put him at edge. And I would actually be very fascinated if a team did that. He's got a similar size profile to someone like Hassan Reddick, who obviously has come along as someone that was sort of that hybrid player before. So, like, there is some intrigue there. But in terms of understanding the position, I just don't see it. I would be really worried that he's going to bust if he's drafted in the top 50, handed a starting job, and asked to do all of the duties of a linebacker. I don't think he's ready to do that. So the upside is undeniable. He's actually got the highest upside grade out of any linebacker in this class, and certainly the potential edge conversion is fascinating. But I just don't know if a team is going to think that creatively. So I compare him to Alec Ogletree. I don't even remember where Ogletree got drafted, but he was always kind of a straight line speed guy, made some plays, had some good years, but just never put things all together in every phase. So let's move on. He's going to be interesting to see kind of what his career trajectory looks like. But my number 3 linebacker, and I just want to say, you know, there are tiers here. I think a tier started at number 9 with Avon Pace up to not Lucas Dennis. That was a safety out of Boston College that I used to love. Didn't turn into anything. But SirVocea Dennis, 6 through 9, is going to be a tier. And then there's a tier there with Dorian Williams and Trenton Simpson. That's tier 2 of your kind of like day 2, really third round gamble on an athlete. And then these top 3 are really neck and neck for tier 1. I think they all have different flavors. Their grades are going to be separated by 0.02 on my grading scale. So number 3 here is going to be Daiyan Henley with a 6.33. My number 1 linebacker is going to have a 6.35. So I can really understand an argument for any of these next 3 as the number 1 linebacker, and in general, just the first linebacker off the board, even if it's like a what I would do situation. It just kind of depends on the fit, the scheme, and trajectory of where it makes sense. But anyway, with Daiyan Henley at number 3, he's, you know, let's just get it. Like let's be open. He's 3, Drew Sanders is 2, and Jack Campbell's 1. So Sanders is going to be the worst guy now with the highest upside of these 3. Campbell is the best guy now with the lowest upside of the 3. And Daiyan Henley, to me, is in the middle of those 2 grounds. I think he's going to be a good player right away. I like especially his pass coverage. This as a player that was a receiver for a long time. I think he even caught passes earlier in his career where was it? He wasn't at Washington State. He transferred, I think. Hold on. Let me Nevada. Yeah, he started as a receiver, made the transition to linebacker in 2020 full time. So you can really see those receiver instincts come through when he plays. There's a play, I can't remember who they were playing, but he's covering a wheel route man to man, and he has those like receiver instincts. He gets his head around, tracks the ball in. This is a guy, he had 8 pass deflections or 8 pass breakups in his career. 5 of those 8 he converted into interceptions. So like he has real feel at the position. When he's down the field, he is not uncomfortable with his back turned, running, pursuing the football. It shows, man. And in zone, I think he's still growing there, but he's really good at reading and reacting to the quarterback's eyes. He's got an active head. He's really conscious because he's played offense. He's conscious of how teams are trying to attack that middle of the field. And I can't, at his size, I can only imagine he was like a big slot type. Maybe he played outside receiver and I'm just making that up, but he really does get it from a coverage perspective. And likewise, he does not take the cheese on play action. He is going to make sure that ball is not in the quarterback's hands before he does anything with the run. And that's, very effective from a pass defense perspective. He's also a great blitzer. Was really efficient in that part of the game at Washington State. So the best pass defense day one impact in this class. And then as a run defender, he's fine. I think Eric Kendricks is my high-end comp for him. Kendricks has never been this highly impactful run defender. He's got good tackling ability, both Henley and Kendricks, straight line, pursuit, speed, solid, wrap a guy up, very good. But as far as the size to engage and take on blocks and consistently, make defensive stops in the backfield, or near the line of scrimmage, it's just going to be tough for him. But he did it a lot at Washington State. He broke on a lot of runs early and shot a lot of gaps and made a lot of plays. So he's going to be fine in that department. But at 6'1", 225, he oftentimes feels like a converted wide receiver. He doesn't have that like full strength profile that you look for at the position, but it's fine. It really is. So a plus athlete, a plus coverage player, and an average run defender. So I pointed out Eric Kendricks, who came into the league as a second-round pick. Daiyan Henley probably going to do the same thing. My low-end comp for him is another player I really liked several years ago, Monty Rice, out of Georgia. I think went in the 3rd round to the Titans, and Monty Rice is a breakout candidate this year, you guys, but very similar player as far as the high upside ability coming out and just kind of an average run defender coming out. So I like Henley. I don't really have any reservations. I just don't know. I mean, Kendricks was a really great linebacker for a long time. That's a very optimistic projection, but I see a lot of similarities in their game, and I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. But you're probably looking at somewhere between what Monty Rice has been and what Eric Kendricks was. Then my number 2 is Drew Sanders, who I mentioned is the worst of these 3 now, but could be the best. And he's full size, right? He's 6'4", 235. I think he's even got the frame to add another, probably 5 pounds of muscle would be really nice for him to help him in his run defense, which is not great. And we'll talk about that. But, I really like how he moves as an athlete. I did not expect to like Drew Sanders as much as I did. I was just really impressed by his range in coverage, the way he can flip his hips and cover tight ends with that length at 6'4", the sideline to sideline pursuit speed really wasn't reflected by that 4.66 40. I thought he played much faster than that on tape. Now, there's always a balance there. You want to take your tape grade, take your, what he ran, revisit the tape, and come to a final conclusion of how fast this guy is. I think he's got certainly good enough speed at the position. We're going to take a look at Jack Campbell in just a second. Jack Campbell ran a 4.65. He is not as fast as Drew Sanders. I don't care what the 40 time says. The tape tells you completely otherwise. So I think he's a plus athlete at the position. I know he is. Now, that showed up in coverage. And I mentioned that I walked away more impressed by Drew Sanders than I thought I would be. This dude has incredible instincts in zone coverage. For a guy that was a converted edge rusher in his first year at linebacker, his way that he kind of navigated route combinations and understood the way that defenses were trying to attack him. He almost never took the cheese on play action in the 3 games I watched. Getting depth in his drops. Like, he eats up space back there, man. It's really impressive, and he knows what he's doing. I think there's a lot more room for growth in terms of covering tight ends and stuff. Just something he hasn't done a whole lot of. If he can speed up that reactionary kind of route squeeze and the ability to kind of trail route runners, like, he could be a really plus man coverage defender against backs out of the backfield, against tight ends. I really think he's got phenomenal upside in that department. Now, in terms of run defense, it was kind of a frustrating watch because it's just all over the place. I mean, just to begin with, the run diagnostics, the decision-making, the gap discipline, so far to go in that department. He played edge at Alabama. This was his first year as a starter. It's you can understand why he didn't really know when and where to go in run defense. He was often late to gaps and often just out of position. You can understand that, but it's something that's going to have to come along big time at the next level. But there were some really exciting flashes as well where he's taken on blocks. He's got pretty good strength in his really entire body, but he can take on blocks and shed. Even when he's playing like a strong on-ball linebacker as like a 7 technique, he can take on tight ends and set a strong edge on like 4-3 odd fronts or 4-3 under fronts. You can use him in that department. So I like that. And there's a lot of splash plays where he's flying into the backfield, navigating traffic and coming up with big stops for his defense. But it's just all over the place. And then you throw on top of the fact that he's maybe the worst tackling linebacker in this entire class. He's got to freaking get coached how to tackle in space. He really struggles there. I think it's a feel thing for him, and that's going to be a big decider in what kind of player he can be at the next level. So my pro comp for him is Devondre Campbell, who was he was an All-Pro last year. He got a big contract for Green Bay. Physically speaking, they're almost identical. 6'4", about 230 plus pounds. Good athletes, and not great run defenders, but really instinctive coverage players. I see a very similar player with Drew Sanders, and Campbell, I think, entered the league as maybe a 2nd or a 3rd round pick for the Falcons. Has bounced around the league at a couple different spots. Really took 4 years to get there. I think Sanders can be a little bit further ahead than that, but he is a player that is going to probably take a couple years before you're looking at him and saying that's a good starter in the league. But I do think he's probably going to be starting before too long because of where he's ultimately going to get drafted. So you might have to expect some learning curves with him, but I did end up liking him a lot more than I thought I would. And then we got Jack Campbell, number 1. And I don't even really need to spend that much time on Jack Campbell. There's nothing really to say other than he's just not a great athlete. He's an outstanding linebacker. He gets the position better than anyone in this draft. And he's big. He's 6'5", 250 pounds. There's not a lot of those guys sitting around. There's no one in this class that's nearly as big as him. So as a run defender, I have no doubt that he is going to be a day one impact for your run defense. He could be like a top 10 linebacker in terms of run defense in the NFL immediately. That's why my pro comps are in the range of like TJ Edwards or CJ Mosley. Campbell's bigger than those guys, but as far as what they're going to be good at and what their impact could be in run defense, I think that's a similar kind of conversation. And for a low comp of TJ Edwards, who's like a good starter in the NFL, that's pretty damn good. But when it comes to pass defense, he's just limited, man. He really is. And I get it. He had like almost a perfect RAS score, relative athletic score. Henley Platt doing great stuff with that website. But, and I like RAS, but the 4.65 40 was like an absolute peak score for him based on his tape. I expected, mid to low 4.7s. I think everybody did. And like we said with Drew Sanders, you see a time like that, you want to revisit the tape and question what your eyes saw. But I did that, and I'm like, yeah, he's still not the player that plays on the field does not match this god tier athlete that his testing numbers would indicate. And you can really train for this stuff and squeeze the absolute most out of your athletic tools in those drills. If you got your technique down, especially in a drill like the 3-cone, repetition can be really important there. So I'm not trying to dismiss those scores, and I think it's important. And you can see some of the side-to-side lateral ability. If he's shuffling left to right, absolutely. There's plays where he shows a really quick trigger, but for the most part, his trigger looks about a half a step delayed, honestly, in terms of like first step acceleration. So I have to trust my eyes at some point, and I get the testing numbers are exciting, and he's still my number one linebacker, but I'm not going to compare this guy to Tremaine Edmonds, who just moves so much better on the field at this size, right? So if you're putting him in coverage, he's not covering a ton of range. He's got length to compensate for that. Like, look at his interception against CJ Stroud. Like, his frame and ability to kind of torque backwards and just barely reach that interception, like, it matters for sure. I've got a B zone coverage on him because he's smart and he has decent range from his size. But the ability to get depth quickly, the sideline to sideline ability, and especially if you're talking about putting a man coverage assignment on Jack Campbell, it's just not going to look very pretty. He's also not some sensational blitzer either because of some of the lack of athletic tools. So I'm not trying to dunk on Jack Campbell, but I'm just saying there's a lot of hype for him. He's going to go very early in this draft, and I just don't know if he's going to be a game-wrecking linebacker at the next level. I think a best-case scenario is someone like C.J. Mosley, who's been a very sound run defender, a team leader. He makes a few plays in coverage every year because he can read the defense and have some of that range and as a zone cover player. But yeah, just some athletic limitations there with Jack Campbell. But he is my number one linebacker because he's going to be the best guy out the gate in this class, almost assuredly. So there are your top 10 linebackers for the 2023 NFL Draft. Again, everybody, make sure you come back here for draft weekend. We'll be live here on YouTube. Please do make sure you're subscribed. We've got lots more draft content coming your way before the draft, after the draft, and then we're getting into deep dive series. Make sure you like the video as well and drop a comment down below where you agree, where you disagree. If you think I snubbed anybody, make sure you check out my Patreon. You can get access to my full draft rankings. You can get my thoughts on any players that didn't make this top 10 list. Maybe a guy like Owen Popo out of out of Auburn. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And our next video is going to be I believe top 10 safeties or just the top safeties in the draft. I don't know if it's going to be a top 10 because this is such a weird position and a weird class. But anyway, I'm going off the rails here a little bit. We'll see you guys for the next one. Peace out.